Imagine you are a data analyst. Your organisation has a problem with high turnover and it is losing talent and knowledge. You have been asked to analyse the data at your disposal to predict flight risks, those employees who are likely to leave the organisation soon, to target them for interventions. What data would you use? Perhaps length of service, performance review records? Or how about analysing emails, collaboration platforms, or your internal social network? Or analysing data from external social networks, such as LinkedIn? How would you decide whether your approach was ethical or not? My talk today explores these questions. Can an employee give informed consent for the use of their data in big data analytics? Is their consent enough to make sure that this use is ethical? Understanding ethical use of employee data in this way is important. There is not much yet written about informed consent in relation to using employee information in big data analytics. Here, I press analytics professionals to think deeply about the ethical use of employee data. I challenge the belief that informed consent is sufficient for the use of data to be ethical. Instead, I propose a new way of thinking about the ethics of big data analysis. This draws upon the virtue of trustworthiness. What is big data? Originally, the term emerged along with the advancements in technology that made the collection of immense data sets possible. So here the term is simply identifying the size of the dataset as big. Now the term tends to refer to not only the size of the data, but also to the ability to analyse that data efficiently, for example, through searching, aggregating, and cross-referencing. Why are advancements in big data analytics relevant to organisations and their people data? Organisations hold huge amounts of data about their people, not only in their human resources information systems, but in their collaboration platforms, email systems, and internal social networks. Organisations are beginning to explore analysis of this data to give insight into key business issues. For example, Google's use of employee pulse survey data to improve its people processes, or Juniper Network's analysis of LinkedIn data to discover where its employees come from and go to develop strategies for attracting and retaining employees. Microsoft use HR analytics to identify employees who are more likely to leave, to communicate career opportunities to them. Or Royal Dutch Shell, who collected and analysed data to identify the people who tend to have the best ideas, which led to business improvements. These examples indicate why big data analytics incorporating people data may be a powerful tool for an organisation. Analysis of a wider set of data from different sources can help an organisation make informed improvements to its processes. These improvements can of course lead to significant cost savings for the organisation, for example, saving on costs related to turnover. So there are clear benefits for the organisation of big data analysis of employee-related information. But what about the employee? How can they be sure that the organisation is using their data ethically? Many countries have legal restrictions on how data can be stored, collected and used, for example, the General Data Protection Regulation in the UK. Typically, these types of regulations require that employees positively consent to the collection and processing of specific data, and are informed in clear language as to what this means. Obtaining informed consent is thought to provide ethical justification for the use of employee data. In this context, I define informed consent as being required to respect the autonomy of an individual employee. That is, the autonomy of the employee to make decisions regarding the use of their data. A common account of autonomy is that of individual or rational autonomy. In outline, this account states that the autonomous action has to be rationally chosen by an individual person. Hence, autonomy is a psychological capacity to make rational choices. Thomas Hill argues autonomy is a capacity to make rational choices in a rational manner, and that the paradigms of non-autonomous people include children who accept autonomy without question, traditionalists who will not consider new ways of doing things, and compulsive gamblers who cannot stop gambling even though they want to. This concept of autonomy is claimed to be protected by the requirement to seek consent from data subjects, as this requirement protects and promotes the autonomy or capacity for autonomy of the person. The provision of informed consent is taken to be sufficient to ensure that the data collection and use is ethical. Autonomy is an important concept within data collection, as it is taken to give ethical grounding to the principle of obtaining informed consent from data subjects. This places a duty on data collectors to ensure that the data subjects have the capacity to choose to inform these people about how their data will be stored and used, before seeking their consent to proceed in order to respect the autonomy of the person. I am not convinced by the claim that obtaining informed consent is sufficient for ensuring the ethical collection and use of data in the case of employees. The central problem is that of whether an employee can be truly informed to be able to consent to the collection and use of their data. Informed consent would require disclosure of all potential known outcomes and studies planned for the data collection. How can we ensure that an employee is informed enough to adequately give consent? I am not sure that we can. It is not possible to convey all the knowledge required for informed consent through a one-off obtaining of consent when an employee joins an organisation. At that time, the organisation cannot know all the potential uses of the data. Jeske and Calvard identify a related complexity in that cross-referencing between datasets runs the risk of removing individuals' anonymity, whether intentionally or accidentally, which could generate an unforeseen need to obtain consent. This risk is increasing due to advances in machine learning, which enable employers to profile and identify individuals by combining different data sources. The employee may have a limited capacity to absorb such information, or be overwhelmed by the volume of information. Further, an employee has little choice in whether to give their consent or not. The organisation seeking the consent has greater power in the relationship. Depending on the data, it may be possible for the organisation to exclude an employee from the exercise, but sometimes the employee simply cannot work for the organisation if they do not provide the data, which is rarely an option for the employee. Finally, the organisation responsible for obtaining the informed consent is also a variable. Informed consent is not possible if the organisation is not of good moral standing or is lacking sufficient knowledge of the data collection process. I propose a new approach to the ethics of workforce analytics, based upon the virtue of trustworthiness. What is the virtue of trustworthiness? In general, virtue is a state of character. In the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle lists the virtues as courage, temperance, generosity, magnificence, magnanimity, pride, patience, truthfulness, wittiness, and friendliness. Each virtue has a corresponding vice, which can be either an excess or lack of the characteristic. A fully virtuous person, according to Aristotle, is disposed to think, feel, choose, and act at the right times, about the right things, towards the right people, for the right end, and in the right way. On this account, the fully virtuous person possesses all of the virtues. If thinking about a particular virtue, for example courage, a courageous person will perform the courageous action in the right time and place, and for the right reasons. The virtuous person must have the wisdom to perform the right action, for the right reason, in the right sort of circumstances. In summary, virtues are states of character that dispose a person to think, feel, choose, and act in the right way. I propose that trustworthiness is a virtuous state of character, with a corresponding vice, untrustworthiness. Possessing the virtue of trustworthiness means that the individual will decide and act trustworthily from a settled state of character. For example, to be trustworthy means that the individual will act with the right amount of attention to external pressures, in accord with their own self-awareness, for the right reasons and on the right occasions. Trustworthy actions are identified as being the actions of an individual with a character trait. Thus, to decide whether a particular action is trustworthy, we need an understanding of the character of the person. How does trustworthiness help us with thinking about the ethical use of employee big data analytics? Because I think that it is necessary for analytics professionals to be trustworthy, to ensure ethical use of employee data in big data analytics. This shifts the focus from the data subject and their offering of informed consent to focus on the responsibility of the people undertaking the data collection and analysis to be trustworthy. This avoids the problem I outlined earlier of the inequity of power in the contractual relationship between employee and employer, and the problems of how to share enough information to inform consent. Someone may object that considerations of the character of the analytics professional cannot help us with practical decisions about what is or is not ethical use of data. In answer, I would draw upon Daniel Russell's take on virtue ethics, arguing that considering the virtuous person allows us to model practical problems in a way that focuses on how one responds, reasons and acts in facing the problem. Put simply, consider whether you would be happy with your action being made public in the news, as Morgan Witzel suggests. Would this action reveal you as the type of person you would like to be known as? This shift of focus onto the trustworthiness of the organisation and for people carrying out the data analysis has the advantage of aligning with real-world experiences of engaging employees with analytics projects. For example, IBM were only successful in analysing information from their organisational social network by building up a trusting relationship with their employees, being wholly honest and transparent about how an individual's data was being used. In conclusion, in line with recent moves in considering informed consent in medical ethics, I am proposing a consent process that relates more to the employer doing good in relation to the employee, rather than the concept of autonomy dominating the process. Under my view, the consent process is an ongoing process, arising from the development of a trusting relationship between the employer and employee. Thank you very much for listening. I'm very happy to take questions.